I'd like to begin the episode by sharing a revealing secret about myself, and hopefully it'll give a little bit of context about why I feel strongly about today's subject. I distinctly remember my adolescent years for how they were marked with discontent. I compared my life in high school to dropout Chris Brown, who had overnight commanded the airwaves. We were peers, but his life had taken a turn for the better. I was still scribbling rhymes in my notepad with the bedroom door locked, while Chris had doors held for him as he made his way out to perform in front of thousands. He was young and rich when I couldn't get my dad to give me an extra 20 for my weekly allowance. It gave me great unease to be comparing myself this way. Such feelings of discontent, dysphoria are prevalent in the tumultuous teenage years. We all at some point in life wish we had what we don't. And more than any other time in recorded history, young boys and girls are experiencing desires to become a different gender. They're challenging who they are externally seen as and wish to be viewed as either female souls trapped inside of male bodies or vice versa. These feelings of identity mismatch are called gender dysphoria, but more accurately, gender identity disorder. This phenomenon has certainly been at the center of the latest culture wars as netizens butt heads on social media over the postmodern definitions of sex and gender. Indeed, the debate about empathy and the empirical on this subject is redrawing the lines of our cultural mores. So, if you could travel to 1985, you would read in the Los Angeles Times that an overwhelmingly 89% of American parents would be upset to learn that their child was gay. But by the turn of the century, that number will have gone down to 73%. And a decade later, it would be a 50-50 split between upset parents and those who wouldn't be upset. By 2015, only about 39% would still be feeling somewhat apprehensive to their child coming out. And finally, only 27% would say that they feel uncomfortable if their child came out as gay or lesbian or bisexual by 2022. The changing cultural attitudes have coincided with the increasing number of people that identify as non-heterosexual. According to Sharita Gruberg, she's observed that the greater the awareness of diversity of sexual orientation and gender identities grows, and the stigma around LGBT identities lessens, the more people will want to freely express their sexual preferences. Indeed, not only has the rainbow demographic doubled compared to a decade ago, there's lesser fear, fewer hurdles, and greater access than ever before to medical care. The impact of these paradigm shifts are much closer observed among Gen Zs, particularly those pursuing the arts in colleges like Oberlin, Wellesley, and Smith. According to Lisa Littman, she agrees with the notion that peer pressure is part of the rise of LGBTQI plus students. Queer-friendly campus communities definitely allow students to learn about and also to grow comfortable with their own sexual identity compared to co-ed institutions that aren't. Richard Kaufman, however, sees the social contagion much closer linked to something else. He argues that it's hardly about people feeling freer to come out, but rather being of a very liberal mindset. In fact, he points out to the example of left wing activists who more than often identify as LGBT, and a poll of 70% of very liberal women who strongly agree with shouting down offensive speakers being of other sexual orientations. Now, although there's a wider acceptance today of gays, lesbians, and bisexuals, an aversion towards transgenders, particularly, still persists. Only 50% of adults in one 2022 poll said that they would feel comfortable if their child came out as transgender, and 36% said that they would feel uncomfortable, while others held their opinion. It was much more telling of conservative social norms in another poll, which showed 76% of atheists being accepting of the existence of trans people, compared to 38% of all Americans who feel the same. There's another development that I'd like to call to your attention. The years between 2017 to 2022 saw an exponential rise in gender dysphoric youth, which brought about the awareness of another daunting reality. The age of those receiving gender affirming care was found to have been plummeting. Boys are recorded as seeking treatment as early as 13, while girls at only 11. While the young ages at which transitioning is happening today are alarming, Aaron Samuel Breslow argues that it's a victory in early intervention when we see that healthcare providers are meeting with gender dysphoria patients at an early age. Other discoveries that have been made are that girls are disparately hit by strong desires to be gender non-conforming compared to their boy peers. Girls are more likely to develop a proclivity for wearing clothes typical for the opposite gender, a preference for toys and activities thought of as for the other gender, and a strong dislike for their genitals, with the latter, of course, often necessitating urgent medical attention at the earliest signs. Being a parent of a child struggling with gender mismatch must feel like being crushed in a crucible. You're forced to challenge your parental experience right from the beginning. See, you carried a male child for 9 months, gave birth to a boy, and the doctors recorded it on the birth certificate along with his name. But all that changes on his 13th birthday when he comes out as a girl. Were you wrong? Was the hospital wrong? And is she right? Is any of it real? Or is it just a phase? And what does the Bible say about it? Could this be the devil? Not even 100 lifetimes could have prepared you for this specific moment where you hang in limbo between having no answers and the love you have for your child. You've heard stories about parents losing their child for responding with fear and ignorance, and you antagonize with your faith, wondering if God could really have given over your child to depravity. Her mental health concerns are somehow yours now, and you wish you could just yell at her and somehow she would wake up from this nightmare that you are both a part of. But you've been warned about suppressing gender expressions in children in an LGBTQ parents online support group. It's more than disconcerting that the suicidality of transgender and non-binary persons is among the highest there is among the youth. And you don't want to drive your baby to do that, do you? What are your options? You can either be firm with your child and likely drive her over the edge, or you can be supportive to a living odd boy in a dress and makeup. What's more, the news reports that the Department of Homeland Security has confirmed threats of violence against the LGBTQI plus community increasing and intensifying countrywide, and these equally add to your anxieties as a parent. So, though you worry about her being out there in the world, you still know that you would do anything to keep your baby safe, including commit a capital crime if it comes to it. You don't mean that literally. Maybe you do. Still, you're emotional, distressed, paranoid, and somehow you have to find it within yourself to keep together the supportive aura for your new daughter. It certainly doesn't help to ease the mind when there's a myriad of conflicting views about gender dysphoria. How is it that experts can't make up their mind on the topic? But that would make your job as a parent to a disturbed kid so much easier, wouldn't it? For instance, Neil deGrasse Tyson has offered that X, Y, and XX sex chromosomes are insufficient in the determination of one's gender. He insists that each one of us chooses to exaggerate whatever feature of gender we prefer, something that could easily change depending on what leg you get off the bed with. This process of discovery shouldn't be stifled, according to Dr. Ching Fang Sun. She urges parents to encourage their children to explore their identities with an unbiased stance. While she acknowledges that further research into what causes sex gender mismatches needs to be done, she insists that the public should be educated on gender diversity. Richard Dawkins, however, is the contrarian to each of these ideas. In an essay for the British magazine The New Statesman, answering the question, "What is a woman?" Dawkins writes, "A woman is an adult female free of Y chromosomes." So, as far as the world's leading atheist is concerned, gender is binary. And he likens a man choosing to dress up as women to a white person identifying as black. These views cost him his 1996 Humanist of the Year award. Thanks to a social media group for parents of LGBTQ, you are now aware that children going through the wrong puberty can get access to various medical treatments. One such treatment that is looked upon favorably is GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone analog therapy. So, this is one of the many forms of assistance to young patients of gender dysphoria. It works by suppressing the release of sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen that ultimately alter how adolescent boys and girls respectively naturally develop. This explains its more famous term, hormone blockers. Boston Children's Hospital says that GnRH doesn't cause permanent changes in children. St. Louis Children's Hospital supports this view as well, adding that this type of care is no more than hitting the pause button. This allows an individual to delay the physical changes associated with the sex they are assigned at birth, providing more time for exploration and consideration of potential gender-affirming treatments like hormone therapy or gender-conforming surgeries in the future. Our NSH Gender Identity Development Survey study concluded that 12 to 15-year-old trans children under puberty blockers had a positive experience of treatment. They published this in the journal PLOS1. Participants' experience of treatment, as reported in interviews, was positive for the majority, particularly relating to feeling happier, more comfortable, better relationships with family and peers, and positive changes in gender roles. This grand optimism for gender affirming care by local health officials in the US isn't shared elsewhere in the West. A team of doctors in one of the best known medical schools in Europe, Karolinska Institute of Sweden, raised the alarm on puberty blockers in late 2021, citing that they should be considered experimental and ruled out as the standard form of care to children of gender dysmorphia. They emphasize that GnRH analogs can delay bone maturation and mineral deposits, which may only be partially restored by age 22 with cross-sex hormones. A Swedish mom shares the sad story of her transgender son, Leo, who was prescribed puberty blockers for 4 years. By age 15, Leo couldn't stand for more than 15 minutes. He had developed osteopenia, a medical condition where one lacks proper bone density. According to Leo's parents, they were not made aware of the risk. However, the doctor that warned the parents about the side effects were reported to the management for incitement. Richard Neagard of the Karolinska Institute in Sweden said in a 2021 interview that what we call GnRH treatment is chemical castration, and it could affect mental health in an unintended, undesirable way. Rather than blindsiding parents with optimism of what relief puberty blockers could give a child anguished by their natural identity, Neagard believes in full transparency. He says it's very important that the patient and the patient's family are informed about this. With further research by the Karolinska Institute and more gender-affirming care survivors speaking out, the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare in 2022 passed more restrictive measures on the medical use of puberty blockers for trans youth. They ruled that they are only to be prescribed in exceptional cases, as their use is backed by uncertain science. Sweden is one of the many countries that have pivoted accordingly on the subject. Doctors from France, the United Kingdom, Finland, Norway, Belgium, Switzerland, and South Africa signed a joint letter to the editor in the Wall Street Journal warning about the dangerous cavalier with which the American doctors were going about transgender medication procedures. And they insisted that all the research till date suggests that there are hardly any benefits of hormonal therapy for the mental wellness of trans minors. The American Medical Association, however, speaks highly of its confidence in healthcare givers in administering proper medical aids to gender diverse people. The board warns against the dangerous precedent of government intrusion into medical practice with various legislative bans on gender affirming care. They argue that foregoing these necessary medical procedures can have tragic consequences for transgender individuals who face increased risk of anxiety, stress, substance use disorder, and suicide. Furthermore, what their research has found out is the majority of transgender and diverse gender patients report improved mental health and lower rates of suicide after receipt of gender affirming care. Yet, do white papers and official statements have any potency against the lived experience of detransitioners? Chloe Cole from California was diagnosed with gender dysphoria at age 9. No doubt she'd had a troubled childhood, as being on an autism spectrum takes a toll on your mental wellness during the early life stages. Although she had found herself dressing up like a boy most times, transitioning never really occurred to her until she registered for an Instagram account and stumbled upon LGBTQ content. She didn't act on it until the worst nightmare for any young girl happened to her. She was sexually assaulted during her 8th grade year, which only heightened her dislike for her private body parts. When taping down her breasts wasn't enough, she and her family sought medical help. It was an excruciating decision for the parents to make, but they quickly let their guard down when the gender care specialist offered that having a living trans kid was better than a dead daughter. At only 13, Chloe was put on puberty blockers, which was followed by testosterone shots a month later, and this continued for the next 2 years. She eventually got weary of having to hide her breasts and decided to have a mastectomy done to complete the transformation into a teenage boy. It would, however, prove to be a short lived experience, as a year after the procedure, Chloe came around to wanting to raise children someday, marking the genesis of her detransitioning. When she and her parents consulted the gender care specialist again, they suggested a breast reconstruction surgeon as the remedy to the more permanent changes she now had. Last year, in a statement she made before the U.S. Judiciary Committee, she expressed the deep regret with which she and her family became victims of gender affirming care. In a heartfelt appeal, she said,
I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems.
I would now like for you to tell me in the comment section, what as a parent should you do when how your child was born is irrelevant to how they see themselves today? You've been told to be supportive of their gender exploration journey so you don't add to their inner misery. But how far are you willing to play along with this new gender identity? You probably have the courage for the new hair, different clothes, or even a new name. At least these make your baby happy. But what if your child wants something more extreme, like GNRH? Does your support go as far as surgery? Where do you draw the line? Even when you know the permanency of certain medical procedures and the little help they prove to be ultimately. At what point do you muster the strength to be the parent who stands in the way of the intense social pressure and the pressure from the medical professionals to conform and save your baby from a catastrophic choice? These are just my thoughts, and maybe you relate with some of them, maybe you don't at all. But I would like to know from you, what is your thought process? What would you do? Why would you do it? I've been your host, Martin K. And as always, a lovely pleasure to be with you here. And I look forward to seeing you again in another episode. Take care. Bye bye.